Hello AS, welcome to your AS mock mark scheme. Let's get started. So what I would like you to do for every single question where you did not get full marks is I would like you to listen, watch the video and then annotate it. So when I come to speak to you, I'd like you to be able to say to me, if I was asked to do this question again, this and this would make it better. I'd prefer you to do it in a different coloured pen if you can so it stands out, or pencil as well. Okay, the whole time I'd like you to be identifying trends in your feedback. So is there a certain thing that you didn't do very well and think of ways that you can move forward. So for this one, the two of the following statements about the division of the nervous system that are correct shade only 2 boxes, which most of you did. The problem was you then later went on, some of you went on the second question when asked for to shade 1 box, to shade both of them, to shade 2. A. The fight or flight response occurs when the parasympathetic division controls functioning. This is not correct. It is the sympathetic nervous system which activates the fight or flight response, and the parasympathetic, parallel to the sympathetic nervous system, which brings it back into line. B. The central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. That is correct, which most of you identified. I was really pleased about that. C. Sensory, relay and motor neurons are all controlled by the somatic nervous system. This is not the case. There are also some motor neurons found in the central nervous system and many other types of neurons. So neurons are not dedicated to one particular part of the body. And then sensory neurons carry information from the central nervous system. You experience pain and sensations in your brain, in your spinal cord. Hopefully not. That would be a very, very bad sign. So sensory neurons carry information to the central nervous system from the outside world. So at the moment I'm touching the key, I can feel the keyboards, they feel very smooth plastic. That is my sensory nervous system. Sensory neurons taking information to the central nervous system. Motor neurons, motor messages come from the central nervous system. And the somatic nervous system controls voluntary movement, which it does. Not involuntary, but voluntary. S for sensory, O for the brain, and M for motor. So that's it controls voluntary movements. Briefly outline how excitation and inhibition are involved in synaptic transmission. Considering I gave this question to you in the lessons, I'm a little bit torn. I was a bit disappointed that some people weren't able. I saw the majority of you able to give it a go, even though some of you perhaps didn't get it spot on. For some of you, you didn't have a clue. If you didn't have a clue on this one, if you got very low marks, then you need to reflect on your revision and how carefully you listen in class, and maybe that is one of the things you need to consider. Neurotransmitters can be excitatory or inhibitory. Most can be both, okay, but what that means is a neurotransmitter, you can have serotonin can be excitatory or it can be inhibitory. It cannot be simultaneously excitatory and inhibitory. So the way I would leave that, if you're not going to include the stuff about GABA, which is fine, you don't need to, is neurotransmitters can be either excitatory or inhibitory. If the neurotransmitter is excitatory, then the postsynaptic neuron is more likely to fire and action potential. Check. Have you mentioned all those 4 things? Lots of students seem to forget to mention postsynaptic. If the synaptic transmission is inhibitory, so if the neurotransmission is inhibitory, then the postsynaptic neuron is less likely to fire an impulse or an action potential. So again, make sure you've included all of those things. Some of you did not get the 4th mark because the 4th mark, is about summation. You might have been limited to 2 because that's how many marks you could get. The excitatory, and this is a phrase that students struggled with, so just think about the wording of it. The excitatory and inhibitory influences are summed, so they are calculated. If the net effect on the postsynaptic neuron is inhibitory, the neuron is less likely to fire, and if the net effect is excitatory, then the neuron is more likely to fire. Neurons are chemicals found in the vesicles in the synaptic gap and bound to the receptors on the postsynaptic neuron. Neurons are the pre and the post neuron. So make sure you don't confuse neurotransmitters, which are the little chemical things, and neurons, which are the whole thing that takes the information across. For full credit, there should be some understanding of summation. You must make reference to it. And for full marks, excitation and inhibition are clearly explained with reference to synaptic transmission. And most importantly, so this is for 4 full marks, effective use of terminology. Go back to that answer and check you have included all the effective use of terminology. This was really disappointing that people didn't spot this one. I was really surprised. If you were fed up, I imagine in lesson you were fed up with me constantly saying, what does the word cognitive mean? What does the word neuro mean? And you answering me. If you were fed up of that and you did not get this answer correct, you need to reflect carefully on that. For those of you who got fed up and who got the answer right, you can be thrilled. Being fed up for a little bit was worth it just to get that one extra mark, which might have pushed you forward. Cognitive, internal mental processes. Neuro, brain, science, sort of, we'll go with the study of roughly. So it should have been immediately obvious. First of all, shade one box only. Please, some of you need to read the question carefully. A singular box. If you shaded two, no marks. To relate mental processes to brain structures. Neuro, brain, brain is in the answer in A. Should have been, no pun intended, a no-brainer. Should have been dead easy. To relate theoretical models to mental processes, that is cognitive psychology. Cognitive neuroscience is part of cognitive psychology, but theoretical models is cognitive psychology. Biological terms to explain behaviours, well, the word biological, as it suggests, biological approach, and then use computers to explain mental processes. Same as theoretical models, type of cognitive psychology, not a type of cognitive neuro, brain, science. Outline the fight or flight response for 3 marks. A lot of you spent a lot of time telling me about the fight or flight response, not outlining the exact process itself. So 1 mark for any of the 3 following bullet points. You only get 1 mark per bullet point though. So the hypothalamus prepares the body for action. It involves the release of adrenaline, and if you mention the adrenal gland or the any parts of the brain there. Triggers, activate switches from parasympathetic to sympathetic activity and back again. For some of you, I may have been, when I was feeling incredibly generous, gave you a mark if you mentioned sympathetic or parasympathetic, 2 separate marks. Technically, it should only be 1. So it triggers you to move from the parasympathetic to the sympathetic nervous system or sympathetic activity, or you could have got marks for explaining at the end afterwards, sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in and returns your body to homeostasis. You get a single mark for talking about the direct effects of adrenaline, and this is where a lot of you gave lots of extra detail that you didn't need. Increased heart rate, 1 mark. If you then said about increased heart rate and then mentioned constricts blood vessels, you're still stuck with 1 mark. If you increased the rates of blood flow, 1 mark. Blood pressure, 1 mark. Blood away from the skin, 1 mark. Kidneys and digestive system, 1 mark. So you need all of those things. Outline the fight or flight response. Doesn't mean tell me what it is. It means explain the process. So what happens first and so on. Almost all of you, I think everyone apart from 1 got this right. I was really thrilled. A non-directional hypothesis is suitable, as there is no reference to evidence or there is no previous research. What percentage of students reported they would be able to concentrate better if they listen to music while working? Show your workings. Please make your workings clear. You might have a weird way of doing it, but you need to really clearly demonstrate what you've actually done. Otherwise, you can't get the markings. You get 1 mark for the correct answer of 55% and 1 mark for correct workings. So 22 divided by 40. I might have been times by 100. I may have been generous with some of you. If you just got the maths a little bit wrong, I still gave you the mark. So you might have got away with an extra mark when you probably shouldn't have. Explain why using stratified sampling might improve this study. Explain why. Use the P structure. And this is really important. I didn't see anybody doing this. I want you to look for the number of you got 1 mark instead of 2. If you'd used the P structure, you would have got 2 marks. Okay. And then in this study, why improve this study? So they want, explain why they want evaluation. This study, they want it contextualized. You would have the example there. A strength of stratified sampling is that it increases representation or generalizability. For example, by sampling many subsets of students. This is a strength because it increases population validity. And for some of you, you need to make a note that if you talked about reliability here, that that wasn't correct. You didn't want to do that. So strength of stratified sampling is that it increases representation, makes the target population more representative. Sorry, the sample more representative. For example, sampling many subsets of students. Boom, students. Contextualized, leave it there. This is a strength because it increases population validity. So you would get the 2 marks for that. You get a mark for evaluating and a mark for saying it's a strength because, and then you get the marks by contextualizing. We've gone over this 100 times. Explain why. P structure. Strength of stratified sampling is it reduces researcher bias. For example, students are selected at random. This increases internal validity. Dead simple, there you go. Stratified, not systematic. Stratified is when you collect strata. So if your target population is 40% male and 60% female, then you would make sure that 40% of your sample was male and 60% was female. You would not talk about the nth terms. Nth terms, you are being systematic, and then strata, you are being you are stratifying. You're doing stratified sampling. Explain what is meant by primary data. Primary data is original data, first-hand response of participants, source in research, collected specifically for the research being carried out. Credit answers that refer to data in the study described. So if you've contextualized it, do not credit an answer which simply states collected by the researcher. So those first 2 bullet points are the things you want to talk about. First-hand data, original first-hand data, and collected specifically for the research being carried out. Explain one reason why. Explain why. P structure. The mean would be the appropriate measure of central tendency. So many of you dropped marks for this one, so please make sure you use the 2 marks. It even says it. I've copied and pasted this from the mark scheme. 2 marks for identification, a strength is, and clear explanation. This is a strength because of one reason why the mean is the most appropriate measure of central tendency. Measure of central tendency, make sure you're aware you've got the right ones. So strength of the mean is calculated using all the individual values. A lot of people got 1 mark for that. You didn't then say why it was a strength. This is a strength because it can be said to be representative of all the data collected. A strength of the mean is it uses all values in the data set. This is strength because it's the most sensitive measure of central tendency. A lot of you said there were no extreme values. There were extreme values in the table. So that's not what they wanted you to do. Hence why explain why a strength is. You all know the strengths of a mean. So please look out for that explain why structure, and remember it's the P structure. It's 2 marks here without any contextualization, so no need for an example. Calculate the mean value for both task A and task B. Show your workings. So 1 mark for a correct answer, 63, and 1 mark for the correct working, 630 divided by 10. Task B for 77.4, and the correct workings were 774 divided by 10. So nice and simple there. You add them all together and then divide them by the number that there are. Please remember a calculator in the exam. That maths is also fairly simple, so I'm pretty sure all of you could have been able to do it without a calculator, but why bother when you can take a calculator in with you? Discuss the purpose of counterbalancing. About 3 people got marks on this, which tells me 3 people pay attention to the homeworks. I set this exact question. I also asked A2 students to go through it with you, so some of you will have spoken to Caitlin in particular, who was very, very vocal about how you would answer this question. Please reflect. If you have some feedback, you don't get any haven't got any marks on this, and it's on your feedback to reflect on your previous homeworks, then this is because you didn't get the marks in this, which you have seen the mark scheme for. So I'm trying to help you as much as possible. It controls the impact of order effect, practice fatigue or boredom. It does not remove it. If think about fatigue effect. Some people do condition A, then condition B. Where does the fatigue effect happen? Condition B. Some people do condition B and then condition A. Where does the fatigue effect happen? Condition A. I've already spoken through this to you. Does that stop order effects, fatigue effect from happening? No, it still exists. However, it balances it. And I really emphasize to people they need to use the phrase controls. So, because controls for the impact of order effects, because it allows order effects to be distributed evenly across both conditions. 50% of people doing condition B experience a fatigue effect, and 50% from condition A experience fatigue effect. It was not removed, it still happened, but it was balanced. Counterbalancing. Okay, making each condition of the IV occur as the first task and the second task equally. If you did not talk about controls, if you use the word removed, I think it says it here, sorry, counterbalancing does not eliminate order effects because there are 2 separate tasks to be completed. There are still order effects in place. No marks for any answers which state decreasing, reducing, eliminating, preventing order effects without any reference to any of the above points. So no marks if you said any of those words or any words along those lines. It controls for order effects. You have seen these before. Please reflect. What I'd love to hear people saying is when with their on their action plans or the feedback, however we're going to do it. I would love to hear people saying one of the things they're going to do is think carefully about how the way that they use the homeworks that I set. They are for a reason. I don't just love torturing you with homework. Identify one possible extraneous variable the psychologist should have controlled for. Explain how this variable might have affected the results of the study if it was not controlled for. First of all, the first mark is telling me about the extraneous variable. If you have repeated measures written next to your answer, that means that you talked about individual differences or participant variables. Why, if the piece of research is repeated measures, does participant variables not factor in? So if we're thinking about, for example, if we had, I'm trying to remember what the AS scenario was now. It was music, was it music and without music, and doing yes, concentrating better or worse without music. So level of intelligence, for example, would not count, because if you had a very, very low IQ, then you, in condition A, when you did it with music, you'd have a very low IQ, and in condition B, when you did it without music, you would still have the same IQ. We use the phrase, you are comparing like for like. You are comparing that person with the same person, so it would not be relevant. So it would be things about standardization that would need to be significant, or things about the environment. So level of difficulty in the two spot the difference tasks, wearing headphones, the music tracks, instructions for participants, characteristics of the psychologist, change in environmental conditions. So we're comparing like for like, so all of their unique variables are transferred from one person, can transfer condition 1 to condition 2, they take them with them, but things that might be different, for example, the, well, we'll go through it in a minute, but the difficulty of the two spot the difference task, one might be harder or easier than the other. The other two, 1 marks for elaboration of the effect of the EV, and 1 mark for how it might have affected the DV. So tell me what the extraneous variable is, tell me how it might have an effect, tell me how it impacts the effect, what effect it has on time. Because it says here the results of the study, so it wants you to contextualize. Level of difficulty in the two spot the difference tasks. If the two tasks vary in difficulty, they might cause the participant to take longer on them, rather than it being the music or no music having an effect. So spot the difference, 1, they might cause the participant to take longer, 2, rather than being about the music or no music, 3. Okay, so please reflect on that one. If you got this one wrong, particularly if your mark said that you had to underline, I wanted you to start underlining, considering the stimulus in more careful detail. I would like you to make a note of these things which you then need to highlight in every stimulus. They might not be in every single one. Even if you didn't get this, it might be worth doing. I'd like you to underline the method. So if you can put M for method and think about what word you could have to prompt you that. I want you to underline the IV and the DV, unless of course it's a correlation. If the method says it's a correlation, so a relationship that's covariable 1, covariable 2. But for now, method, IV, DV, experimental design, controls, sampling, or sampling method. Okay, so method, IV, DV, controls, experimental design, sampling, or sample. Okay, so think about those and create a mnemonic, so one word that triggers your memory for each one of them. I will be asking you about that. Explain how the follow-up study could be said to be an improvement of the original study. Dead impressed with a lot of these. Some of you struggled a little bit and you need to be careful if you talked about repeated measures. Both situations have repeated measures. If you talked about quantitative data, both had quantitative data. Okay, so I need you to think carefully about that. So possible things you could have talked about. The second study was more objective. In the first, participants self-report what they believe to be the case. The measurement of time allows for more detailed analysis of data. The use of experimental method involves manipulation of the IV, establishing cause and effect in follow-up studies, which is a feature, not a feature of the self-report method. Possibility, one you all mentioned a lot, possibility of socially desirable answers as a feature of first study, which might be unreliable. This is not present in follow-up study, where measurements is more direct. Credit any of the possible explanations. No marks for simply stating more valid or reliable. A lot of you tied in validity and reliability with the answer there, which was great. I was really thrilled to see you using that terminology. Something we've not studied overtly, features of science for next year. So if you got any marks for this and you considered it carefully, then that's a very, very good sign. You should be very pleased with yourself of kind of approaching the question, sort of reflecting on it carefully. And finally, the thing you've all been waiting for. is the grade boundaries. So the standard ones that we use, because every year it changes on each exam paper, were 80 plus for an A, 70 plus for a B, 60 plus for a C, 50 plus for a D, 40 plus for a E, and 39 and minus to 0 for a U. However, to give you, and that's what I would encourage you to think about, however, to give you a little bit of a boost and to think more carefully, these grade boundaries change quite and can change quite drastically every year. But just to give you a feeling, last year, if you, and which is this the paper that we've just looked at that was marked, if you got 0 to 40, you got a U. If you got 41 to 47, you got an E. If you got 48 to 53, you got a D. If you got 54 to 58, then you got a C. If you got 59 to 65, you got an A. If you got 65 plus, you got B, and then you got 66 plus. Okay, so they are the grade boundaries that you can consider. Please fill in your action plan carefully, and the best way to prepare for a one-to-one to me is when I meet with you, say I'm going to do this, 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 and this to resolve that. Okay, well done for surviving your mocks. Let's move on to the real exam. Okay, thank you very much.